Hello and welcome back to my channel. You may recognise me, but you also may not. So this is the first of the AQA GCSE Geography A-level revision videos that I'm doing. You might have been able to see on my channel there are loads and loads of other revision videos. So I've done some for GCSE. I've also done a load already for Edexcel A-level because that's what I did when I was in school. And so I already had the revision guides and everything else. But I have made a revision guide for each and every unit of work for the AQA A-level geography spec. They look like this. So let me put my mic down for a second. They look like this. So as you scroll through, you'll be able to see all of the revision that is there, and you are able to pick these up on my website, which I will leave linked below. It's also important to note that on my website, if you don't want to buy them individually, if there's just one unit that you're struggling with, you can gain access to something called an Access All Areas. Now, Access All Areas is essentially a Google Classroom, and you are then able to access all of the revision guides. There are multiple choice questions, there are Quizlets, there are banks of revision questions, there's essentially a library of all my past videos, so you're able to go and see it. And that, basically, if you're looking at buying 2 or 3 of these revision guides, financially it makes more sense for you to go and make the purchase of the Access All Areas. You'll get access to everything all at once. Yeah, that's my recommendation. Obviously, that depends on you, what you think you need help with. And with the Access All Areas, you're also able to submit work, like exam questions and things like that, that I am happy to mark for you. And give you some feedback on as well. So in the few weeks that you've got left before your exams, I'm more than happy to do this. We're starting with human geography today, and I'm going to do global governance, changing places, and population in the environment this week. Next week, you will then have coasts, glaciation, hazards, ecosystems under stress, and then the following week it'll be water and carbon, hot desert landscapes. What else am I missing? Resource security, and changing urban environments. So in the next 3 weeks, you should see a video on each of these. So hopefully they are useful for you in the lead up to your exams. If they are, please share them with someone who you might find them equally as useful. I think that's everything I need to let you know of. So let's get going. What actually is globalization? So globalization is a multifaceted process of change which has led to an increasingly interconnected world, in particular over recent decades, leading to something called globalization. Globalization includes an opening up of world trade and markets to transnational corporations, or TNCs, and it results in a wider range of associated effects on people, culture, political systems, and the environment, which we're going to think about today. So, the dimensions of globalization. There are many different and often complex flows within the world today, including the flow of information, so the sharing of information and ideas worldwide between transnational corporations, capital, so money. Highly developed economies invest less in less developed economies to take advantage of production costs that are cheaper there. Technology, so the internet largely ignores political boundaries. Products, with cheap global networks, have encouraged intercontinental trade in different products, which is why you're able to get products from Australia and France and the United States and South America here within the UK. We've also seen a sharing of labour. So efficient transport enables workers and tourists to travel increasing distances between places, and services. So the flows of capital, information, people and products. TNCs produce global products with the same global brands over and over as part of their marketing strategies. Products often manufactured by TNCs in lower cost, less developed countries are subsequently widely distributed across the world. Whilst populations of highly developed countries still consume the majority of global products, a growing share of this consumer class now lives in our emerging countries like China, India, Russia, Brazil, and South America. They are BRIC economies. So what factors influence globalization? New technologies, communications and information systems. The global financial systems also allows flows and lending of money, but it could also cause a negative feedback loop and limits within the system, such as the global banking crisis of 2008, where countries become so reliant on one country for money that when that country stops, their economy essentially falls apart. Transport systems. So the friction of disease, time and space has declined, creating new opportunities, but also new threats. So we can now see a global spread of disease. Think about the pandemic, for example. Security. So cybersecurity is also a growing concern for governments and companies. And trade agreements. So the World Trade Organization ensures trade agreements between countries and trade blocs are followed. Interdependent and unequal flows. Increasing interdependence of economic, political, environmental and social global systems result in winners and losers. An example in Uganda illustrates the both positive and negative outcomes of which result in unequal flows of money, ideas and technology. So in Uganda, we've had civil war, corruption, HIV and AIDS, malaria are all barriers to development within this country. It's landlocked, which affects flows between Uganda and the wider global system. The Kimberley mines, Uganda's largest copper and cobalt mine, provides inward investment from TNCs and provide jobs within the country. There's lots of smallholder subsistence farmers up in the rural north, and they are some of the most disconnected communities. This is where we find our Maasai tribe, our indigenous people to this region. Cash crops are produced on fertile land within the Nile Basin. The capital, Kampala, is the largest and most rapidly growing global city city within Uganda, I should say, and Lake Victoria is an important source of fish for export. But poverty and unequal flows of people exist across Uganda. Migration into and within Uganda has been driven by political factors, poverty and rapid population growth, as there are few controls on Uganda's borders. Northern, rural Uganda has faced economic, demographic and security challenges due to civil war and migrants from South Sudan. TNC investment is greatest around the capital city, Kampala, where resources such as cobalt, gold, copper and iron ore are extracted. TNCs often offer much needed foreign direct investment, but are often criticised for working with a culture of corruption, bribery and mismanagement. There are lots of low-value cash crops, such as coffee, tea and cotton, which were once traded by the British East Africa Company, and they still dominate exports nationally. There's also overfishing going on here. So, predatory Nile perch, introduced by the Brits, have resulted in the near extinction of fish stocks on their go. Ability, growth and development. Shambas, the small holdings owned by subsistence farmers, show positive effects of the global system. Mobile phone antennae are evidence of recent technological changes. So cheap wireless technology has enabled telephony to be introduced into these remote rural areas. The village phone model allows businesses to connect with people to start wanting their own mobile phones. Each loan allowed a purchase of a mobile smartphone, car battery to charge it, and a booster antenna to pick up signals from over 25 kilometres away. And farmers pay to use this service to access markets, weather data for farming, and so on. The internet and single produce economies. Firstly, we'll think about China and the internet. The internet connects more than 4 billion people around the world. It illustrates many of the benefits and challenges of globalization by enabling large flows of money, ideas and technology. China has the largest number of internet users in the world. Alibaba.com is a highly successful Chinese commerce company which allows people from domestic consumers to buy branded products from internationals as well as Chinese companies. The Great Firewall is a system of online censorship operated by the Chinese central government, which blocks access to foreign websites and also slows down services, which we call bandwidth throttling. The Golden Shield is a system of domestic surveillance that further helps to enforce state-led censorship. Now thinking about Nigeria's single product economy. Nigeria is a country that should have done well from globalisation. It's an example of a single product economy. Oil and gas revenue account for more than 80% of exports. Membership of the OEPC has aided Nigeria's economic growth. Focus on oil and gas alone has resulted in a dramatic decline in industrial industries of agriculture and manufacturing, in traditional industries, I should say. Oil and gas transnational corporations have been encouraged to exploit the reserves, despite the environmental concerns and disregard of local needs, including land rights. And the effects of Dutch disease. So high incomes generated from oil and gas sales mean imported consumer goods are cheaper than domestically manufactured goods, which leads to deindustrialisation. International trade. It's inevitable. No country has all of the materials and resources it requires. International trade is contentious. So foreign products might be bought cheaply, but the domestic seller might lose a sale in comparison. International trade is political, so countries exert power to ensure national gains as a key driver of economic growth, and it has increased dramatically since the Second World War. And international trade is not always free trade, as less developed economies still struggle to continue within trading. But what are the advantages? The comparative advantages, such as specialisation, produces goods at a lower cost. It allows for economies of scale, a higher purchasing power, more domestic monopolies as a result of cheaper imports, a transfer of technologies to reduce costs, and increase employment as a result of the production for export. However, the disadvantages: there's often over-specialisation leading to potential vulnerability if demand for good declines. We have product dumping, exporting at lower price than they would be charged domestically, slower growth or decline of local industries due to increased foreign competition. We often sometimes have protectionist reactions, so when governments impose additional taxes on imported goods. This is what Donald Trump is doing right at this very moment. If you're watching this into the future, look back at March, April 2025 to see what Trump was doing. He was imposing a load of taxes on imported goods into the US. We also see de-skilling as a result of free trade, as traditional jobs are lost due to production of technology and a job flight. So in highly developed economies, the screwdriver jobs dominate. And new international division of labour is exploitative, so workers' rights are compromised in less developed countries, as labour costs are squeezed by transnational corporations that subcontract on a short-term basis. So we're going to look at Songzhiya, an umbrella city. This is a city on the east coast of China, near the coast. So around 70% of the world's umbrellas are made in China, and around 500,000 of them are made annually in Songzhiya, the umbrella capital of the world. So what are the advantages for Songzhiya? They allow for good road connections to popular centres such as Hangzhou City and Shanghai, and ports, so Ningbo, for exports. The local government provide financial support through the industrial park. There are 1,200 factories, and single workers can make up to 300 umbrellas a day. And there's also low labour costs, allowing for local females to do some work there, and they are also flexible. What about the patterns of trade and investment? The value of exports have traditionally been dominated by North America, Europe and East Asia, although this pattern is beginning to change. The poorest 50 countries account for less than 1% of global trade, with the top 5 exporting countries account for over a third of global trade. Less developed economies, exports generally are still dominated by a limited number of low-value primary products, and our highly developed economies, exports still dominated by consumer goods, although there is increasing competition from the emerging economies and the BRICS. Foreign direct investment has tended to follow the patterns in worldwide trade, and more highly developed economies still receive the majority share of foreign direct investment, but an increasing proportion is going into our emerging economies, particularly those in Asia. The value of international trade has grown dramatically since the end of the Second World War. Export of manufactured goods is traditionally dominated by North America. The decline of our highly developed economies share of the market over the last 30 years has seen an increased share go to the BRIC economies. China took over Japan in 2004 and the USA in 2007 to become the world's leading exporter. The terms of trade. The terms of trade refers to the cost of goods that a country has to import compared with the price at which they can sell their exports. The terms of trade generally favour our high developed countries, as cheaper primary products are imported from our less developed economies and then manufactured to a higher value consumer goods by our highly developed countries. Because there is a widening price gap between the value of primary products and the value of manufacturing products, some less developed economies need to export increased volumes of this primary product if they're to afford to buy these manufactured goods from our highly developed countries. So the impact of trade in metals. There has been an increased demand for metal from the emerging economies over East Asia and particularly China. Over a third of copper is consumed in China. To meet the increasing demands, China has invested heavily in African mining operations. New mines in Africa have caused a positive multiplier effect, including jobs and government investment. But critics argue that China is exploiting weaknesses in African economies and, quote, unsafe and unethical working practices. The major trade blocs. A trade bloc is a group of countries largely organised by geographical region, which supports free trade between member states. A common tariff may be paid on goods imported into the trading bloc from outside. So trading blocs that you need to be aware of are ASEAN, which is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, OPEC, which is the Organisation of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, NAFTA, which is the North American Free Trade Agreement, MERCOSUR, which is the Mercado Común del Sur, mainly in South America, and the European Union. We in the UK are no longer part of the European Union, but we are still within the country or the continent of Europe. Helpful to remember. Okay, trading organisations. There are several organisations to help to encourage trade by governing and setting rules. The World Trade Organization removes barriers such as tariffs. The Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, are a global think tank. The Organisation for Petroleum Exporting Economies and Development, let me get that right. The Organisation for Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OPEC, regulates the global oil market. The World Bank promotes global investment and offers loans for developing countries. The International Monetary Fund, or the IMF, promotes global monetary and exchange stability. The G8 are a group of 8 of the richest economies in the world and meet annually to discuss economic development. And the G20 add representatives from the G8, a load of other countries, the European Union, and representation from the IMF and the World Bank to again discuss global trade. Greece and the European Union. Greece almost left the EU in 2015 because of its huge debt to the EU. This was because of unsustainable spending on the public sector, massive government borrowing, inadequate enforcement of taxation, the global financial crisis of 2008, and in 2010, Greece ran out of money and had to borrow over 200 billion euros from the European Union and the International Monetary Fund. If Greece had retained its own currency, it could have been devalued to make its exports more competitive and its imports less so. As this was not possible with the euro, Greece was only able to become more competitive by shedding costs, one result of which was a sharp increase in unemployment, particularly within the service sector, or within the public sector. However, whilst cuts have undoubtedly hurt the Greek economy, its membership of the EU still offers the benefits of free trade. So the arguments for staying in the EU for Greece. Greece benefits from being part of the European Union. It imports nearly 50% of its food and 80% of its energy. Leaving the EU would change Greece's trade balance. It might cause bankruptcies and high inflation with an associated social cost. Greece would find it very difficult to borrow further and therefore would have to pass on increased living costs to the population and everything would become much more expensive. but arguments against staying in the EU for Greece. Greece would be able to trade much more freely and take advantage of its location and geography. It might become a regional trading hub and a gateway to the Middle East, the Balkans and to Russia. Nationally, needs might be met better in a more sustainable and local way, and the return of the drachma would see flexibility of exchange rates. Imports would be more expensive, but this might promote economic growth and create jobs. What is a TNC? TNCs are large, usually global companies, which operate in more than one country. They produce global products, dominate all industrial sectors, both primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary sectors. The spatial organisation of TNCs and their model of production. TNCs usually adopt a hierarchical model of organisation, imposing top-down decision-making control of activities. So branch plants or plants of factories whose HQ is in another country tend to be recipients rather than the initiators of change. This can take the form of either vertical integration or horizontal integration. Alternatively, TNCs might subcontract different manufacturing companies. This is known as truncation or vertical disintegration of production. This avoids costly pension schemes, as workers aren't directly employed by the TNC. By working globally, TNCs are able to take advantage of spreading locational risks and the flexibility of production. So why do TNCs grow so quickly? They do this because of cheap labour, mergers and takeovers of smaller companies, a flexible workforce, including working overseas, the availability to finance fund expansion, fewer environmental restrictions, the globalised transport network, technological developments, government encouragements, and cheap land. So, if you are to pick up this revision guide, you will see the pros and cons for both the host country. The host country is the one that has the factories or that the TNC has put something into, whereas the country of origin is often where we find our HQs. I'm not going to read each one out. Pick the revision guide up and it will be there for you. So, the largest TNCs might have offices, branch plants and retail outlets in almost every country of the world. However, production generally takes place in our lower or emerging economies. Design, research and development tends to be in our highly developed countries, and the headquarters are in the country of origin. They sell and market the same or similar products everywhere through building the brand, although global products are tweaked to meet the needs of the local people, which we call globalization. So, thinking about Coca-Cola as a global TNC. Coca-Cola is one of the most recognised and valuable brands across the world. Nearly 2 billion Coca-Cola products are consumed daily. Growth has been the result of successful marketing, astute investment, and strategic worldwide acquisitions. Whilst quick to realise new opportunities in expanding markets, such as Europe and India, Coca-Cola has been successful in spreading locational risks across nearly 200 countries. What about fair trade? Fair trade, the purpose of it is to create equal opportunities through sustainable development for producers and workers who have been economically disadvantaged or marginalised by the conventional global trading systems. Fair trade aims to pay farmers a guaranteed minimum price, offer fair trade terms, and reinvest in the local economy. So, banana trade. Bananas are traded on a vast global scale. TNCs often own plantations and have a virtual monopoly of the market. They tend to have the following characteristics. Initial high capital investment due to large-scale clearance of natural vegetation and the installation of infrastructure, which allows to access ports for exports. Often a poor environmental record through heavy use of pesticides and unsustainable cultivation methods. Traditionally poor pay and conditions for local workers. Strong vertical and horizontal integration, so the same TNC chemically treats, ships and processes. The so-called banana republics become entirely reliant on banana trade. Profits along the supply chain are squeezed by the TNCs and also supermarkets, who have huge buying power and are able to negotiate prices down. And there has been a recent shift within the retail sector in the UK towards smaller and independent producers. So currently in the UK, 1 in 3 bananas sold in the UK are now fair trade. Fair trade has allowed small-scale producers to compete with TNCs and sell their products all over the world. It has allowed for teamwork with similar-minded organisations working together to meet shared aims, and there are now 4 international fair trade networks. Through government support, the emergence of development in politics in the 1960s, with its encouragement of trade not aid, the establishment of a record of success. So handicrafts were first sold in the US in the late 1940s. Foodstuffs followed the 1970s, initially coffee, and were successfully marketed in shops via world shops such as Oxfam. The brand continues to grow. And consumer awareness. The fair trade brand is now widely recognised and its values are understood. The brand has gained further credibility with the creation of international monitoring systems so that monitors certify the products. What are the benefits of fair trade for the producers? The El Gabo Association of Small Banana Producers in southwest Ecuador now benefits both economically and socially. The economic impacts see stabilised incomes and improvements in standards of living, a guaranteed fair wage on long-term supply contracts. Producers are able to raise additional capital for reinvestment, so tanks to wash bananas, and the migrant labourers are helped, so they're given assistance to buy their own land. The social benefits. Healthcare benefits for families and cooperatives, so free use of the El Gabo Clinic. Provision of educational and medical supplies is also present here. Affiliation with local security systems, such as payments of retirement benefits. Support for the poorest groups through food baskets. There has been improved educational provision, so there's a new school for children with special needs. And marginalised groups have been helped to find employment, such as those suffering with HIV or AIDS. The global food systems and TNCs are often the most powerful on the planet. They impact our lives by influencing what we eat and even how we live. Obesity is now a global problem, but so too is hunger. TNCs are responsible for supplying the food we eat to the nearly 2 billion people who are overweight, arguably overlooking the needs of the 800 million who are undernourished. However, it is illogical to blame food TNCs for making us fat. It's our choice to purchase the more convenient, cheap, processed foods, which can not only affect our health, but also maintain large profits for the TNCs. TNCs, food and technology. Food TNCs are largely responsible for controlling the global food system and the prices that we pay for our food. In general, food is manufactured cheaply in order that the TNCs' profits are maximised. Cheap processed foods is invariably unhealthy. Since 2015, genetically modified crops have now begun to enter the UK's food chain, mainly via animal feed, although widespread planting of GM crops is low compared to other highly developed countries. Additional additives has also been added to food to extend its shelf life, and as a result of intervention and agro-technologies, sufficient food is grown to feed the whole global population. In 2014, almost half of the grain harvested for worldwide production was not processed for human consumption. It was used as animal feed, biofuels, or raw materials for industries. The trade in palm oil. Palm oil is the most used vegetable in the world because its high melting point makes it smooth, creamy, and easy to spread. It's also cheap and widely available. As a result, there is lucrative and vigorous trade in palm oil worldwide. But there are some impacts. So as the rainforest is cleared, particularly in Southeast Asia, it allows large-scale plantations of monocultures. The clearance is by burning, leading to deforestation, burning and releasing greenhouse gases. Locals might be forced off land or have land rights challenged by palm oil TNCs. There is also water and soil pollution caused by chemicals used in palm oil production, making other forms of agriculture there impossible. The farmers may be forced to work for low wages and in poor conditions as they become dependent on TNCs, and traditions may be lost. Sustainable palm oil. Is the answer to stop using palm oil products at all? The Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil suggests not, and the promotion of sustainable methods of the production of palm oil. The RSPO represents more than 200 producers, processing companies, retailers, banks, NGOs from over 75 countries. To be RSPO certified, palm oil must be produced where there is environmental conservation, consideration of the needs of employers, and responsible development of new plantings. Critics of the RSPO argue that members still clear areas of pristine rainforest, and in some plantations, the working conditions remain poor. Green palm certificates are produced when the plantations meet RSPO standards. This provides traceability for transnational corporations, which are under pressure to prove their green credentials. There are often growing concerns for the tropical rainforest biome, in particular for populations of the endangered orangutan. So let's think about global governance. What actually is it? The Commission on Global Governance describes that global governance as the sum of many ways individuals and institutions, public and private, manage their global affairs. A range of actors manage their global affairs, impacting and contributing to the shaping of wider global systems, and they act both reactively and proactively and include nation states, profit-making companies, especially TNCs, NGOs, international organisations such as the United Nations. Global governance, therefore, is an international process of consensus forming, which in turn generates guidelines and agreements of governing the actions of those same players. Norms, rules and laws are constantly made and remade, which shape global systems. Norms are the values, traditions and customs that govern behaviours in societies. But not all societies agree as what is normal and reasonable, making global governance and the role of institutions such as the United Nations very complex. Interpretation and enforcement of laws can differ between signatories and international agreements and treaties. This can have consequences in areas such as the protection of workers' rights. In a globalised world, transnational problems need solving. Perhaps this can only happen through international organisations such as the United Nations, the WHO, World Bank, and the International Criminal Court, who are in a position to do this. Global sovereignty and global governance. There are over 200 individual nation states, each with national territories and security responsibilities. But exclusive sovereignty is not realistic in an increasingly interconnected, globalised world. Just as rivers do, people, money, ideas and information leak out of individual nations and flow across borders into other countries. In reality, nation-states exercise sovereignty, authority over their territories and interests beyond national boundaries, and pooled sovereignty is when everyone's best interests are taken into account. Issues associated with attempts at global governance. Deepening economic globalisation, as well as increasing migration, trade and capital flows, make individual states more and more susceptible to policies adopted by others. Likewise, climate change and increased activities in the global economy and the global commons do not fall within the jurisdiction of one particular country. This is why many organisations are championed to take the lead in trade, health and environmental issues. Is the United Nations a global government? Arguably, one of the most significant sets of norms, laws and values and institutions arise from the work of the United Nations. The UN was established in 1945, immediately after the Second World War, to maintain world peace. It has since developed and subsequently enforced international laws and policies that impact directly or indirectly on every one of the world's citizens. Article 1 of the UN's Charter states its purpose, summarised, to maintain international peace and security, develop friendly relations among nations, promote equal rights and self-determinations of peoples, achieve international cooperation, encourage respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms, and inequalities and injustices on a global scale. The Centre for International Government Innovation has identified a number of inequalities and injustices in almost every sector of global governance. They all impede progress in the global economy, security, development, and the environment. These gaps refer to jurisdiction, which is the gap between the need for global governance in many areas, but the lack of an authority with power or jurisdiction to take action. These gaps refer to incentive, the gap between the need for international cooperation and the motivation to undertake it. This gap is seen as closing as globalisation provides increasing ways for countries to cooperate. And participation. The gap acknowledging that international cooperation remains primarily the affair of governments, leading to civil society groups on the fringes of policymaking. But concerns include environmental governance involving so many agencies and agreements that duplication and incoherence is restricting progress, the need for collaboration among the IMF, the G20 and the OECD if international jurisdiction and regulation of finance is to improve, the need for international law to ensure and enforce water security, and the better coordination to deal with epidemics and vaccine stockpiling. Troubling gaps were also highlighted in the global governance of science and technology, urbanisation, migration, energy, and even transnational crime, such as cybersecurity. So with great power comes great responsibility. China has changed the way it does business, and as its wealth and power grow, so will its interests expand, with its increasing influences on the global scale. China might feel the need to intervene in the Middle East peace process. But how will this contribution of this new superpower be received by them? Okay, let's think about the global commons. So the global commons are defined as parts of the planet that fall outside the national jurisdictions as to which all nations have access. These are the high seas and the deep oceans, the atmosphere, the north and south polar regions, Antarctica in particular, and outer space. Some widen the concept to include resources of interest or value to the welfare of nations, such as biodiversity. Indeed, the global commons may well be used the collective heritage of humanity, the shared resources of nature, and the society that we inherit, create, and use. The rights and benefits associated with the global commons can only be assured through effective management on a global scale. A strong and effective United Nations could ensure the coordination, cooperation, and coherence required. The new Sustainable Development Goals adopted in 2015 could provide a solution, a perfect vehicle for promoting and enabling the formulation of rules and regulations governing the use of global commons and the monitoring and enforcement of those rules. Current conventions and treaties governing the global commons include the High Seas, the 1982 United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea, the Atmosphere, the United Nations Framework on the Convention of Climate Change, the United Treaty System governs Antarctica, and the Treaty on Principles governing the activities of states in the exploration and use of outer space helps to protect outer space. So, Antarctica, threat from whaling, fishing, and mineral exploitation. Antarctica is a unique continent of extremes. If it were a single country, only Russia would be larger in area. It's almost entirely covered in ice, which flows out to the sea in slow-moving ice shelves and glaciers. It has no native or indigenous population, but surprising biodiversity. It is rich in mineral resources, and it is home to around 4,000 scientists and over 50 research stations. Beneath 14 million square kilometres of Antarctic ice, 4 kilometres thick in some places and much thicker elsewhere, lies a continent formed by two blocks separated by a deep channel. Tectonics explain that East Antarctica shares a similar ancient rock to South America and Australia, exposed at the surface by the Transantarctic Mountains, I should say. Beneath the ice of West Antarctica is an archipelago of deep mountainous islands, much of which is exposed in the Antarctic Peninsula. Where Antarctica's rocks are exposed, vegetation is limited by cold, aridity, wind, and lack of soil. Lichen and moss predominate, the latter particularly in the peninsula area, where summers are warmer and hardy flowers can grow. In contrast, the surrounding seas support a vast variety of marine birds, seals, which feed at sea, breed on land or ice, but rarely venture inland. The seas around Antarctica are frozen or covered with ice pack for much of the year, have a moderating influence on global temperatures, and are naturally bonded by the Antarctic Convergence. Following its discovery in the 18th century, economic exploitation of Antarctica has focused on the resources of the surrounding areas. In the 18th century, hunting for fur seals and the point of virtual eradication. Later in the 18th century, Norwegian, British and American whaling of blue and right whales for oil and baleen, which is whalebone. In the 20th century, whaling widened for meat consumption and bone meat until the International Whaling Commission finally achieved an essential ban on conservation, for conservation. And in the 21st century, fishing is now the main contemporary economic focus, but Russian and Japanese exploitation of the Southern Ocean for rock cod and krill is raising serious concerns about overfishing, and conservation is essential. Known mineral resources in Antarctica include coal, oil, manganese, titanium and even gold and silver. But sizable accessible deposits are rare and even then not economically viable to mine. Any mineral exploitation on Antarctica would have to overcome seriously hostile environments characterised by major problems of inaccessibility, the extreme and hazardous climate, and deep covering of moving ice sheets and glaciers. Scientific research on climate change. 30 nations run scientific research stations in over 50 widely scattered coastal and interior locations. Collectively, this represents the multinational laboratory for incalculable value, conducting research into atmospheric, terrestrial and oceanic systems. Antarctic research has provided a clearest link between the layers of greenhouse gas in the atmosphere and the global surface temperature. Analysis of properties of ice core layers and also air bubbles captured within them allows scientists to reconstruct changing patterns of air temperatures along with past concentrations of greenhouse gases. Such analysis has revealed that climates follow natural cycles through geological time. Climates will continue to change into the future with or without humans, and human activities have contributed to contemporary climate change. But the trends are not straightforward. The East Antarctica's ice sheet is actually thickening. The warming seas cause increased evaporation, which condenses clouds into small droplets and falls as snow in the frozen interior. West Antarctica's smaller, warm-based ice sheet is more likely to slide into the sea than the eastern ice sheet, which would raise global sea levels by 5 metres. The Antarctic Peninsula temperatures are rising 5 times faster than the rest of the world. Consequently, ice sheets are breaking up, no longer holding back land-based ice. If these sheets slide into the sea, vast quantities of water will be added. With increases in transport, technology and clothing, this has allowed Antarctica to be accessible to increasing number of tourists. It's albeit limited to in more affluent groups though. Record numbers of visitors are dominated by groups from our highly developed countries, and this is not mass tourism. The vast majority includes a visit by a cruise liner, seeking the chance to see vast icebergs, whales and penguin colonies. Adventure tourists seek photo safaris, kayaking and so on. Flying onto ice runways or the use of smaller ships allows easier opportunities to land. But there are valid concerns about the impact of tourism on Antarctica's ecosystem. However, such a financially exclusive sector could be viewed as a powerful force for Antarctica's environmental and cultural conservation and maintenance. So the strict government and self-regulation allows for relatively low numbers of closely managed visitors who have a relatively minimal impact. Only 5% of landing sites show signs of wear and tear, and litter is negligible. Visitors tend to be well educated, responsible and environmentally aware, and are expertly guided in small groups. And there are strict regulations on marine pollution and waste discharge, which suggests that long-term protection is assured. However, cultural heritage sites such as the old sealing and whaling exploration stations are under pressure and require repair. The peak summer season coincides with the wildlife breeding seasons, so giving giving clusters of populous species disturbance may be unavoidable. Antarctic ecosystems are extremely delicate and vulnerable to accidental introduction of invasive species and pollution and disturbance, and marine safety cannot be guaranteed. The sinking of the MS Explorer in 2007 demonstrates just how hazardous icebergs can be. Global governance. Who actually governs Antarctica? Antarctica is not a nation state, but over the years, 7 countries have made claims to segments of it, all of which have been disputed. However, the areas assigned are recognised by the research zones where the individual countries run scientific bases. Lack of science, lack of peace. Land of science, land of peace. This lack of sovereignty is why the Antarctic Treaty System is so important. In December 1959, 12 nations, including the USA, and as it was then, the USSR, Russia, signed this international agreement not just to recognise, dispute, establish, or allow future claims to territorial sovereignty over Antarctica. Crucially, the ATS, which now has 52 signatories, will guarantee free access and research rights to all countries, prohibit military activities such as nuclear bomb tests, and ban the dumping of nuclear waste. But pressure has grown to exploit Antarctica's mineral resources. NGOs are acutely aware of the potential drastic consequences of this, and, with public support globally, propose replacing the unenforceable convention with a formal protective protocol. Hence the 1991 Protocol on the Environmental Protection, which saw signatories agreeing until 1948 to ban all mineral resource activity, including the exploitation of the continental shelf, promoting comprehensive monitoring and assessment in order to minimise human activity on Antarctica's fragile ecosystems. The work of NGOs in Antarctica is important in concentrating and providing expertise, championing causes, contributing independent perspectives, rallying public support and provoking action. For example, concepts of sustainability and environmental stewardship have developed directly from the conservation movement, which includes high-profile NGOs such as the World Wildlife Fund for Nature and the Combined Alliance of NGOs in Antarctica and the Southern Ocean. They have been crucial in championing the case for designating marine protection areas and marine reserves, while wildlife is under increasing pressure from commercial fishing and climate change. For over 50 years, the ATS has prevailed with no major problems and is an inspiring example of international peaceful cooperation promoting invaluable scientific research. But ATS decision-making can be problematic, as decision-making by consensus does not mean that everyone must agree, but that no one can voice disagreement, so resolutions can be stalled even if one country feels strongly about an issue. And it is without legal penalties, so most parties are essentially on their honour to abide to their obligations. Mutual trust works in Antarctica, and with the support of NGOs, much is agreed and achieved. The protection of this remarkable global common is moving forward. So that is the end of Globalization. What was it called? Global Governance and Systems or something like that. I don't know what the actual title's called. Global Systems and Global Governance, that's what it is. So that is the end of your first revision wander through. I'll call it that. As I say, the revision guide is available down below if you would like to get all of them. They are all already on the Access All areas, so do go and pick that up. Share this with someone who you think might find it useful, and I will see you on Thursday for whichever I film next.